Welcome to Paper Trail, where we make academic research accessible and engaging. Let's see what the evidence says.
The traditional narrative of human evolution often paints a picture of stark competition between early Homo sapiens and Neanderthals, two distinct groups, perhaps passing in the night, or one displacing the other.
A kind of prehistoric turf war, or at best an uneasy coexistence defined by separate evolutionary paths. But a new paper suggests that entire framework might be dramatically off.
Significantly off. Research from Tinshemet Cave in Israel, published in Nature Human Behavior, reveals that for a crucial period in the Middle Paleolithic, these two groups weren't just occupying the same geographical region, they were engaging in profound cultural exchange, sharing everything from hunting strategies to symbolic burial rituals.
So instead of a battleground, the Levant was more like a melting pot of shared behaviors, pushing against the idea of competitive exclusion. It represents a significant reframing.
Exactly, what the researchers are calling behavioral uniformity.
For decades, the story of Homo sapiens' encounter with Neanderthals in Eurasia was largely framed by this idea of competitive exclusion. Modern humans, with their supposedly superior cognitive abilities and advanced tools, outcompeting and eventually replacing Neanderthals.
That's right. The old paradigm suggested that Homo sapiens had a distinct advantage, whether in lithic technology, social structures, or complex symbolic thought. The Levant, a narrow land bridge connecting Africa and Eurasia, was seen as this critical choke point where these distinct groups would either avoid each other or inevitably clash.
And previous discoveries at sites like Kafze or School certainly confirmed both groups were present in the region during the mid-Middle Paleolithic, roughly 130,000 to 80,000 years ago, but showing they were there at the same time and, crucially, interacting in a meaningful way has always been the holy grail for paleoanthropologists.
This is where Tinshemet Cave changes the conversation. The evidence from Tinshemet doesn't show two separate cultures operating in isolation. Instead, it demonstrates that regardless of their biological differences, the hominins in this region were executing the same daily survival and even ritual behaviors.
So the idea of cultural innovation being driven by isolated biological groups is being challenged by data suggesting that human connections and population interactions were fundamental.
Precisely. Professor Yossi Zeidner, one of the lead researchers, emphasizes that the data points towards the Levant being a melting pot of cultural homogenization, not a zone of strict competitive exclusion. The romance of a prehistoric turf war is replaced by the rigorous reality of deep cultural exchange.
To truly appreciate the findings, a key question is how this information was uncovered. The survival of bone and fragile archaeological material over 100,000 years seems incredibly improbable.
It is improbable, and it speaks to the unique conditions within Tinshemet Cave. The preservation at this site is a testament to specific taphonomic conditions, the processes by which organic remains decay and become fossilized.
Taphonomy is such a critical field for understanding what can and cannot be inferred from ancient sites. What was special about Tinshemet?
The research points to a fascinating interplay. The cave featured thick layers of ash from ritual and domestic fires. Typically, limestone environments are acidic, which would dissolve bone. However, the heavy concentration of alkaline wood ash from repeated long-term fire use likely buffered that localized acidity. This created a stable, calcifying microenvironment that essentially locked the skeletal remains in place, halting degradation.
So, a lucky geological accident, combined with human activity, created this perfectly preserved snapshot in time. And what did they find in this remarkably preserved environment?
Since excavations began in 2017, the team has meticulously unearthed 5 sets of human remains, including 2 full skeletons and 3 skulls, dating to around 110,000 to 100,000 years ago. They were found intentionally placed in pits, often in a curled, fetal-like posture.
5 sets of remains? In pits? In a fetal position? That immediately brings to mind the idea of burial.
It should. This clustering and manner of placement are highly significant. It marks the first mid-Middle Paleolithic burials uncovered in the region in over half a century. And the spatial distribution suggests Tinshemet wasn't just a temporary shelter where people occasionally died, but a dedicated mortuary space. In essence, a 110,000-year-old cemetery.
And the paper uses a very specific word that is a gold standard for proving intentional burial: articulated.
The term articulated is crucial. When a hominin dies on the surface, the body is exposed to scavengers, weather, and general decay. Within weeks or months, the skeleton disarticulates, bones scatter, and the anatomical connections are lost. Finding bones that are still articulated, meaning, for instance, the femur is still perfectly aligned with the pelvis and tibia, or the delicate bones of the hands and feet are intact and in order, proves the body was protected from the environment almost immediately after death.
So, an articulated skeleton found in a deliberately excavated pit leaves little room for ambiguity. These were formal, intentional burials.
Absolutely. It demonstrates a shared cognitive capacity to conceptualize death and treat the deceased with formalized care. It's not just a disposal, it's a ritual act.
Beyond the burials, the researchers delve deep into the technology of the era, specifically stone tools. The paper highlights a technique called the centripetal lavalis technique. For many listeners, that might sound incredibly technical. What is it, and why is it so important?
To truly grasp the significance, consider that Middle Paleolithic survival hinged on stone knapping. The lavalis technique isn't just about smashing rocks together. It demands a highly sophisticated chain operatoire, or operational sequence.
An operational sequence, meaning a series of precise, planned steps?
Exactly. A knapper first has to hold a core of flint and mentally visualize the tool hidden within it. They then begin striking the edges of the core in a circular, inward-facing pattern, that's the centripetal preparation, to create a very specific, convex dome shape on top. Only once that geometry is perfect can a single, precise strike to a prepared platform remove a perfectly shaped, symmetrical flake.
That sounds like far more than just instinctual tool-making. It implies a significant level of cognitive processing.
It implies hierarchical thinking, forward planning, and a deep understanding of the volumetric properties of stone. It's a complex motor skill that would take years to master. Think of it like learning to fold an intricate origami crane. One does not just figure it out by looking at a piece of paper. Someone has to show the precise sequence of folds, and practice is needed.
And the paper meticulously documents this exact highly complex centripetal lavalis technique as ubiquitous at Tinshemet. But the critical part, as was mentioned earlier, is that it's the same technique found at neighboring sites associated with both Neanderthals and Homo sapiens.
That's the key. In fields like evolutionary biology, one always has to consider convergent evolution, the idea that two distinct groups facing similar environmental pressures might independently invent the same solution, like birds and bats both evolving wings. However, the centripetal lavalis technique is far too specific, too complex, and too arbitrary in its exact sequence of strikes to be the result of independent invention.
So, the precise similarity in this lithic fingerprint at Tinshemet and other regional sites strongly points to active knowledge transfer.
Absolutely. Stone knapping is a learned behavior. It requires observation, imitation, and likely some form of communication between individuals. The shared lithic technology at Tinshemet suggests that Neanderthals and early Homo sapiens weren't just watching each other from afar. They were sitting together, observing, and actively sharing the practical, daily knowledge of survival.
So, if the shared tools prove they were sharing survival strategies, the paper presents another, even more surprising finding that hints at something deeper. It's the discovery of ochre.
A massive amount of ochre. The excavation recovered a staggering 7,500 pieces of mineral pigment. This is an anomalous data point, not just a few fragments, but thousands of pieces across a spectrum of colors: red, orange, yellow, brown, and purple.
7,500 pieces. That's an incredible number. And ochre, unlike a flint spear point, doesn't really have a direct, obvious utility for survival.
Exactly. While some anthropologists have suggested it could have been used in hide tanning or as a rudimentary insect repellent, the sheer volume, the color variety, and especially the context of the ochre at Tinshemet overwhelmingly point to symbolic use.
And symbolism requires a cognitive leap beyond mere practicality. It means that a color or a mark holds an abstract meaning, a shared understanding within a group.
It indicates a shared cognitive framework. This ochre was likely used for body decoration, cave markings, or other forms of ritualistic expression. It's about meaning, not just survival. And the most profound detail, the emotional core of this discovery, is found within one of the burials.
You're referring to the specific red ochre burial.
Yes, the researchers found a large, distinct piece of red ochre that had been intentionally placed between the leg bones of a skeleton. This is an undeniable grave good.
So it wasn't just a body being put into the ground to prevent scavenging. The inclusion of an object with no practical purpose, placed deliberately, elevates it to a ritual act. It suggests a belief system, perhaps about identity, memory, or even an afterlife.
Precisely. And the fact that this complex, symbolic mortuary practice is found in a region inhabited by both Homo sapiens and Neanderthals, with both groups utilizing the exact same cave space and the exact same ritual materials, is a massive leap. It suggests these two species didn't just share hunting grounds or tool-making tips. They shared a belief system, or at the very least, a deeply ingrained cultural tradition regarding how to honor the dead.
This all paints such a compelling picture, and it's easy to get swept up in the idea of a prehistoric cross-species utopia where Neanderthals and Homo sapiens lived in perfect harmony. But for rigorous analysis, it's always necessary to distinguish between what the data proves and what remains speculation.
Absolutely. The paper successfully and undeniably proves behavioral uniformity. It demonstrates that cultural practices, technologies, and rituals were shared across biological lines. That is a robust conclusion from the archaeological footprint.
But the archaeological footprint also has its limits. It doesn't necessarily tell us about the emotional or social dynamics of these interactions.
Exactly. For instance, the paper doesn't explicitly tell us if they traded. It is not known if the exchange of lithic technology was a formal barter system. It is also not known if ideas were stolen. Was the knowledge transfer peaceful, or did one group capture individuals, forcing them to produce tools? Was it a tense, competitive borrowing of survival strategies driven by resource scarcity?
And the question of interbreeding, which is known to have happened between these groups in other contexts, isn't definitively answered for this specific site and time frame.
That's right. While genetic evidence from other contexts proves Neanderthals and Homo sapiens interbred, the specific skeletal remains at Tinshemet have not yet yielded ancient DNA that proves hybridization occurred at this exact cave during this exact window. As Professor Israel Hershkovitz notes, the findings paint a picture of dynamic interactions shaped by both cooperation and competition. Cultural merging does not automatically equate to peaceful coexistence.
That's a crucial distinction. History is full of examples of competing human populations that share technologies or cultural practices while remaining fiercely hostile. So while the how they felt about each other remains an open question, the scientific baseline has fundamentally shifted.
It has. The old model of a segregated, biologically deterministic landscape is quite simply dead. The Levantine mid-Middle Paleolithic must now be viewed as a deeply interconnected, dynamic zone of profound cultural exchange.
This research from Tinshemet Cave significantly alters how the complex interactions between early human groups are understood. What are the key takeaways for listeners?
First, the excavations fundamentally shift the evolutionary narrative from one of strict biological competition to undeniable cultural exchange and behavioral uniformity between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals. Second, the widespread presence of the complex, multi-step centripetal Levallois stone tool technique across different hominin groups proves active, direct knowledge transfer. One cannot learn that technique without close observation and interaction.
And the ochre assemblage is such a powerful piece of evidence.
Indeed, the anomalous discovery of over 7,500 pieces of multicolored ochre alongside a formal fetal position burial featuring a deliberate red ochre gravegood proves that symbolic and ritualistic practices bridged the species divide. Finally, while the data definitively proves what they were doing, sharing culture, it cannot definitively prove how they felt about each other. The social valence, whether peaceful collaboration or pressured imitation, remains an open, tantalizing question.
So, this shared cultural landscape raises profound questions about what it means to be human and what defines a species when behavior and belief systems overlap so significantly. Does this new evidence force us to reconsider our understanding of what constitutes distinct human groups in prehistory?
That wraps up this episode of Paper Trail. Join us next time as we dig into more research worth talking about. If you liked what you heard, share it with a friend.
Keep reading the fine print.